Hi everyone, it's Laura here from Nudge. We want to thank you again all for attending the webinar that we hosted last week. We were overwhelmed with so many questions that you had, so sorry that we couldn't get to all of them in the session. So what we're going to do is we're going to record a really quick video to answer some of those key questions. So without further ado, I'm going to get us going. So Tim, over the last few months, have we found that chief financial officers are more actively involved in the buying decisions of Nudge?
Really good question. Short answer is yes. I think there's a big influence there. There's some very public examples of C-suite support of well-being. So the likes of Mark Benioff at Salesforce.com or Alan Jope of Unilever both come out and said how well-being is important. And so, yeah, we're definitely seeing that influence. And I think organizations are finding the approval for financial well-being projects easier and quicker than perhaps they were before the pandemic.
Thanks, Tim. Steve, I've got a question for you. So a lot of people were asking here about how they can improve the uptake of benefits. So question for you in terms of what do you think good engagement is for something like financial well-being, and any good tips of how you can increase that take-up?
Yeah, sure. That's a question I often get asked, actually. I mean, in terms of the second part, what does good engagement look like? I think we'd expect engagement to be between 50 and 75%. But that's something that again we'd expect to grow over time, especially if you're communicating it properly. Which kind of brings me on to my most important top tip here, and it's one that was in our 5 steps to developing a wellbeing strategy, which is personalization. Personalization of communication and targeting employees with relevant information at the relevant time is absolutely crucial to engagement. So that would be my top tip for that.
Great, thanks, Steve. And staying with you, actually, what are the most important topics to provide content on when it comes to financial wellbeing?
Well, I mean, financial wellbeing is such a broad subject, so it's important to make sure there is something for everyone. But I guess right now, given current situation, current uncertain times, I certainly think focusing on helping employees build up their financial resilience. So I guess really some of the basics. So looking at budgeting, having an emergency fund in place, managing household finances. But also, unfortunately, things like avoiding scams, which are on the rise as well. So those would be some key areas I'd focus on at the moment, actually.
Thanks, Steve. Moving over to you, Tim. So we heard Lisa from Workday talk about the Employee Relief Fund, which is a third-party provider that's facilitating that. And a question was asked is, can we share who that provider is and what percentage of employees at Workday contribute to it, please?
Yeah, so if you remember on the session itself, Lisa said she wanted to just check with her colleagues that she was okay to announce it, and she has subsequently come back and said that she is. So it's an organisation called E4E Relief, and so they provide charitable grants to help compassionate companies support employees in need. I'd never heard of it before, but having done a bit of research since, it looks like a great benefit. I'm not quite sure what the take-up is, but I guess I think some people have been in contact with Lisa directly. So if you need to know that, I'm sure you can ask her directly.
Thanks, Tim. And there were lots of questions with organisations talking about redundancies and the unfortunate having to make people furloughed, and asking what support can organisations like Nudge provide if those instances have happened.
Yeah, I mean, this is very topical, with obviously a surge in redundancies announced over the last few weeks and months. I think more and more organisations recognise that their responsibility is beyond the immediate employee base. So we, for example, have launched a redundancy edition of Nudge over the last few weeks. So the idea being that even when somebody moves on from your organisation, as part of your redundancy package, which might include CV writing or career coaching and obviously a redundancy payment, you can give people open access to Nudge over that time as well. So I think more and more organisations recognise at this tricky time there's an opportunity to help people with financial well-being even when they leave the organisation.
Thanks, Tim. We're going to move into more of this financial wellbeing strategy questions now. So Steve, big question for you. What should a financial wellbeing strategy look like?
Yeah, that is a big question. But I'll try and answer it, in a short way. But be really happy to, if anyone's particularly interested in this area, be very happy to talk to people individually about this. I mean, for us at Nudge, obviously, financial education is crucial. That should be the underpin of any financial wellbeing strategy. But then I think it's important to have some specific aspects to it. So you should have clear measures of success. What are the behaviours? What are the outcomes that you're ultimately looking to influence and support your employees with? In terms of those employees, what are the different types of groups that make up your organisation, and how can you target and support them differently? Whether that's people in head office compared to people in distribution centres, or different demographics of employees. You should have a clear timetable of events. What are the opportunities you have to increase people's financial well-being, whether that's annual pay rises, bonus payments, tying things in with pensions. But also it should be a working document. It should be something that you continuously measure and evolve. It's not a one-time piece of work, and that's where we use nudgeonomics and data and insight to continuously measure and evolve that well-being strategy, so it progresses with your people as they progress through their careers.
Fantastic. Thanks, Steve. And then moving on to Tim then, in terms of what are the great sites that people can look at for financial wellbeing and educational content that people could share with their employees?
Well, you would expect me to say Nudge, of course. I think that people need to be very careful and considerate about how different sites work. So, I mean, if you Googled pension advice, you'd probably get 1 million pages come up on Google. So you just need to be really clear and aware about how the source of your insight actually make their money. So even something like Money Saving Expert, for example, if you look in the small print, yes, it's free, but if you look in the small print about how they actually make their money, that might change the way that you perhaps digest some of the content that you read there. So lots of resources out there, but before you dive into the content, make sure you understand how it's being funded.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Some words of wisdom there. And then that brings me on to a lot of the companies that dialed into the webinar are global organizations. So a question here of, do global financial wellbeing solutions actually exist? And how flexible are they to adhere to local markets?
No, they don't, in short. So, I mean, it reminds me, the stage that the industry's at the moment reminds me 2009, 10, 11 with regards to flexible benefits, where there is so much demand now for global financial well-being. I guess that's been heightened with the pandemic, and organizations now realize that global problems need global solutions. Our aspirations when we established Nudge from day one has been to create a global solution. We've made brilliant progress over the last few years in terms of extending our services to Ireland and Spain. And I think best thing for me to say is watch this space in terms of us providing service and support beyond that, but it will be here before you know it. So very, very shortly.
Very exciting. So I'm going to stick with you, Tim, on what advice can you give someone trying to drive and provide financial education content to their company?
I think, linked to my previous point in terms of what's a good site, just make sure that you really understand the provider's true motivations. So, if they're a financial advisory firm, they're only really interested in your wealthy people. If it's a loan provider, they're interested in people taking up more debt. So just really make sure that you ask the difficult, awkward questions about how a potential partner make their money, because undoubtedly that will then influence the support they provide, but also the way that they provide it.
Okay, coming to you, Steve, then. So how do you really find out from your employees what they really want to know about and what support they want from the employer when it comes to financial well-being?
Yeah, interesting question. And actually, I guess, so this is step one of our 5 steps to supporting your people's financial well-being is, all around understanding your people. And on the webinar, you heard from I think Georgia at Vodafone talking about them carrying out sentiment surveys and things like that. And yeah, I mean, asking your employees, you know, is a great step. You know, involving them. You know, what is it they're seeking? But I guess our view is actually, you know, if you ask them, you know, they don't know what they don't know, your employees. I think it's really, really important to combine any sort of insight from your feedback with, you know, data and analytics and insight, and use that and combine those two things to then influence what you focus on from a financial education perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. And then last question, I'm going to go to you, Tim, if that's all right. So there was a question asked about, do you think it's a good idea to get a free service from perhaps your corporate bank that you've got a relationship with to provide your employees with, you know, free virtual seminars, even if the bank is saying, you know, they're not going to sell their products? You know, do you think that's a good idea or not?
I have to apologise, obviously, for my son in jumping around in the background, but I think, as we say on our email signatures, our webinars are all child and pet friendly. So what do I think? I think that it's better than doing nothing, but you need to make sure that you understand exactly what the motivations are. I think also bearing in mind that those types of services are often generic, and you know, that can mean that there's relatively limited impact and a value that can come from them. Steve talked earlier about personalization. That is key, and you don't tend to get that with those types of sessions.
Perfect. Thank you. So I know that was a quick fire question round. I think, yeah, I've tried to group some of the questions into certain themes there. Hope that's useful. We'll obviously share this with you and look forward to inviting you all onto our next webinar series. So thanks, guys. Thanks for answering the questions, and see everyone soon.